actually in downtown Cairo. Uh, yeah, overlooking the Nile.
Is
Uh,
that the Cairo in Egypt?
yeah, Cairo in Egypt.
Is that the one where I worked out how the pyramids were built?
So you claim. I don't think the Egyptians have worked it out so far, but
Well,
yeah.
I worked very hard when I went there to visit in Giza. That how did they build these pyramids? Being that I've got a little bit of an engineering background, I worked it out that they've just filled the stacks up with concrete, and it wasn't the 1,000 slaves that were pushing a block to build that pyramid.
Maybe. So it wasn't the aliens.
No, no, certainly not. Certainly not. So, all of you listening in right now, today we have the wonderful guest today joining us all the way from Cairo. And it's great to have you back because you've been a little bit elusive this year in Ramadan.
I have. I've just been a bit lazy. I don't know. It's been a strange Ramadan. I don't know why. It's just been
You
lazy.
need to start embracing the three Ds. The three Ds is the discipline, the devotion, and the detoxify. That's what Ramadan is there for. The detoxify is the spirituality, the mentality, and our physical sense, of course. And of course, you fast throughout the year, don't you?
Not throughout the year, but yeah, I mean intermittent. Mondays, Thursdays, and Rajab and Shaban as well. So it
MashaAllah.
depends if Liverpool win the league or not,
So
or it's in
everything
the
is
Champions League.
everything. They didn't. They did pretty well, didn't they, on Saturday?
Yeah, yeah. But that doesn't really matter so much. There's no fasting riding on that. It's only the league and the Champions League.
Of course, that is wonderful. So, if all of you listening in right now, today, this week is a week which we call it the EDI week, and Equality, Diversity, Inclusion, and we're going to be discussing that, and we're going to try and find out where we can improve things. Now, I particularly wanted to talk about a letter which you yourself were involved with, weren't you, for to a school in Birmingham?
Yeah, I was actually. It was my children's school. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can kindly share with us exactly the context of that particular subject.
Well, essentially, it was again that collective hysteria that, for some reason, has gripped Western Europe. You manufacture a crisis when in reality it isn't. I don't know. Just hysteria has taken over since COVID. Artificial crisis. It's as if the world is coming to an end, and then everyone just jumps on the bandwagon. And this one was in relation to trying to have a solidarity day with Ukraine. And quite frankly, I wasn't enamored with the idea that we were going to have a solidarity day and my kids being forced to wear a flag, which essentially has become so interwound with a certain nasty, uh, uh, certainly a certain nasty political ideology which was prevalent in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s, and I wasn't enamored with that. So I basically took a stand. I said, look, at the end of the day, I can't see the distinction between Ukrainians, refugees, being lorded over by Western Europe and these refugees that are being allowed to drown in the channel, apart from skin color. And I wasn't prepared for that. So I basically said, right, if you want to wear the children or force the children to wear the colors of a Ukrainian flag, I'm going to make sure that the 50% Muslim kids that attend this school will be wearing the flags of either Iraq, Palestine, or Syria. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I took the stand that come what may, a refugee is a refugee, and no one is going to be given preferential treatment based on their ethnicity. As much as it seems that sort of outright racial discrimination has become acceptable amongst the governing structures of the European Union and the collective West.
Of course, we relate that directly to the flags, the Palestinian flags, when the children in schools were donning that flag, if you remember, a year back.
Well, I'll tell you what I find absolutely despicable and hypocritical. And generally, I mean, now when you meet an average person in the region, whether it's in Cairo or even in the UAE, just the local Arabs, the level of disdain that they now have for Europeans, Brits, and Americans, purely based on the fact that they have now just revealed their faces and you know they've taken the mask off, is incredible. I mean, I was sat with some of the members of the board of directors of the guys I used to work with here in Egypt back 10 years ago, and they'll say, you know what, at the end of the day, these guys are just hypocrites. They hate us. They vociferally, you know, there's a visceral hatred of Arabs and dark-skinned people, and this has just revealed it. You know, he was asking me a question. He goes, how can a foreign, how can a Home Secretary justify sending dark-skinned refugees over to Rwanda, but they are welcoming Ukrainian refugees? I mean, I tried to push the subject under, sweep it under the carpet, saying, by the way, actually, with even with the Ukrainian refugees, they're not letting in that many. But he then came back to me and said, well, I bet even the few that are being allowed in, they're allowed in on flights. They don't actually have to risk drowning in the sea. And having reached there, they're given a home. They're welcomed into people's homes. And rather than being put up in squalid housing, given money, and not sent over to Rwanda to be processed. And how can you argue against that? I mean, that you can't argue against it. What do you say? You say, well, you know, you may have a point. It's just the embarrassment of it.
Of course, we are all concerned about that because we have got once upon a time, 50 years ago, when we were refugees in the UK, and we came here on a plane and were diverted to different camps and then diverted again. So at that time, 50 years ago that happened, and even now we are facing each year, each decade, refugee crisis. And I'm from a country, next door is Rwanda, and it's absolutely shocking that we would even think about sending anybody to a country that is genocide. Genocide was in the 90s there, and now dissidents from that country are being hunted down. And why would anybody think to do that?
Leaving all that aside, there's something called the rule of law.
We got a call. We got a call now. We're going to take that call. And maybe it's a question or two. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother Zed.
Yes. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you too. I just want to basically say, interesting show, the second segment, and the brother who's on it now. Firstly, I just want to say I have utmost total respect for you for speaking out, and all I can say is I think it's whatever's happening in Ukraine. Islamically, obviously, it's not. Innocent people are basically being killed. There's a lot of political thing going on there. But a couple of points I want to pick up on the flag system, where obviously I can tell the brother's a Liverpool fan, which is unfortunately the only drawback. But never mind, we won't talk about that. My question is, when the situation in Palestine was basically happening, I recall, because I'm a big football fan myself. I remember where Celtic fans had Palestine flags flying at Parkhead at that time, and they were all told to not to mix politics with conflict. And every ground we go to now, or every ground there's been condemnation, which is the right thing to do, but it's absolutely hypocrisy that one rule for one for the other. Secondly, the second point about refugees, as the brother said, refugee is a refugee. I think we shouldn't be calling them refugees. They are human beings. Full stop. They are the creations of Allah at the end of the day. So calling them refugees, I think it's something which for me personally is not the right thing. I think they're human beings, and the other point is why do you send people from the boats to Rwanda, and why are we opening doors for Ukrainians in the UK, where we are giving initiative people to house them, which is not a bad. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing, alhamdulillah. But why not for the Palestinians? Why not for the Yemeni people? Why not for all of the people? It's just insane. It's just all political, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But talk to respect for speaking out.
But I think to pick up on your point, and it's interesting what you say about Celtic. In fact, it goes worse than that. And this is where it shows that even in the sporting bodies, there is what you call systemic racism, because racism has become abundantly clear, doesn't exist in Britain or even Western Europe on the individual level. The English people are probably the least racist people on an individual level that you will find anywhere across Europe. And I'll give you an example. It is not in Britain that refugee hostels are attacked and burnt. It's actually in Eastern Europe, in particular in Eastern Germany, right? There isn't the hostility on an individual level from individuals to refugees when they come into Britain from the average British person. The hostility is engendered actually by the system and by the structure and the institutions. And to go back to your point on Celtic, it's worse than that. FIFA fined the Scottish FA £50,000 sterling because a fan dared to actually wave a Palestinian flag in a World Cup qualifier, saying that there is no room for politics in sport. Yet within less than 5 days, they immediately tossed Russia out of the FIFA World Cup qualifier. Now, if that is not systemic racism, I will not know what is a prime example of systemic racism. Essentially, the reason why they are so viscerally upset, and so it's gone to the levels of hysteria about Ukraine. Leave the politics aside. I don't really care what the politician is. But on an average media level, systemic level, it is the fact that unlike a Palestinian or unlike a Kurd or unlike a Iraqi or a Syrian, right? Even though some Iraqis, some Syrians, some Kurds may actually have blue eyes and blonde hair, what the problem is for the systemic structure in Western Europe, in the EU and in Britain, is the fact that those particular refugees, unlike the Ukrainians, have a black man's religion. And that is the problem that they've got with it. That is the problem that the Palestinians have.
What you're saying that this is a historic issue?
Of course. I mean, all you need to do is go back to Jacques Delors back in 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where he actually said, I look forward to a Europe united by a common Christian identity. And The Guardian, memory serves me right, I think it was The Guardian at the time, which said, all that means is Muslim Turkey, please stay out.
And that has been very prevalent over the last 20 years. It's never changed.
And by the way, it became more prevalent since the Labour Party took over in government in 1997. That sort of visceral hatred of refugees, of Muslims, didn't actually, from memory, didn't really exist under the old Thatcher Tory government. one thing you could give the Conservatives under Margaret Thatcher was their strict respect for the rule of law, which seems to have been completely thrown out since the Labour Party took over in 1997. And it's just got worse and worse and worse. And I'll give you an example. Your example, when you turned up in the 1970s...
1972, September.
No, September 1972.
The 10th.
There was a court system and a structure where the British government, and I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was a Labour Party government at the time, tried to discriminate against the likes of you.
No, it was not. It was the Conservative Party in Leicester.
Was it the Conservative?
Yeah.
Okay. But even when they tried to discriminate against you, the case went to the divisional court. It was judicially reviewed, and the policy was said to be a racist policy, and it was struck down, and the government was forced to back down on that policy. The question then becomes is there actually the equivalent judiciary now and the rule of law to actually strike down this particular racist policy that this particular Home Secretary is trying to put through? And ironically, it's a Home Secretary who came from the same country as you did, Zed. That is the irony of it.
Yeah, I'll give her a call after the program to ask her these questions, and if she will.
Yeah, you can definitely ring her. You can say to her, she's not fit for office now.
No, I can't say that. You can't say that to anybody. You know, everybody is there, elected, and they're doing what they can. But sometimes, what you got to understand that they act upon advice and guidance and so on, and make decisions.
But the strange thing about it is, if you read the newspapers here, she didn't act on the advice because there are certain members of the civil service in the Home Office who have grave misgivings about this policy.
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
can see why. Because essentially, leaving aside what the motivation is, right? I'm not saying, and I don't know what's inside her mind at the time when she made the decision. But if you look at it objectively, how can it even look remotely objectively as a policy which would not be struck down on the basis it's clearly racially discriminatory?
That's correct, and correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm obviously I'm partially impaired blind, but maybe I've heard it wrong. Apparently, all the men will be sent to Rwanda, but all the women who basically cross on the boats will be processed in the UK. Now, how does that work?
What if the man and woman is husband and wife?
I don't know the ins and outs of that bit, but the clear message was that the men who basically come on the boat will be off to Rwanda, and the women will be processed here. So I don't get it.
What the issue here is, and this is where the likes of Nigel Farage don't actually get the nuance of this. The reason why the men come across is because often they are married. It's not a case of these are single men, but they actually are hoping to get here and then allow their families to join them in a safe manner. It's not because they simply want to come here because they've decided all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, that we don't like Iraq anymore, we don't like Syria anymore, we don't like Libya anymore. The reason why they're coming here is because whether we wish to like it or not, it is the Western government's policies that they created failed states in those regions. Okay, they were until 2011. How many Syrian refugees were coming across into Britain and Europe? Not that many. Why? Because Syria was effectively leaving aside all the problems that there are. I'm not going to turn it into some sort of a nirvana, right? I'm not going to say it is the utopian state, but it was not the mess that it is now. And the people who created that mess, and I think there has to come now to be a provision in international law which actually specifically says, if you break something, you own it. So if you decide to go and trash somebody else's country, you have to take responsibility for the refugees. It is not the responsibility of Jordan. It is not the responsibility of Lebanon. It is not the responsibility of other countries in the region to basically pick up the mess of the destruction of Syria. The people who were responsible for that have to pick up that mess. It is not the responsibility of, again, Jordan. It is not the responsibility of Iran or Turkey to pick up the mess of Iraq. It is the responsibility of those people
Right.
who decided to turn
I've got
Iraq
to,
into what it
right,
turns out.
guys, these are broad international issues. They're not going to be solved by you and I, and we need to bring it back to what is happening here, right here at our doorstep. Of course, this will affect everybody. The war and the sanctions have already started affecting us all in Europe. The fuel prices have gone up, the food prices have gone up, everything has gone up, right? So the impact on the society will create social disintegration and social disorder as well. And with that disorder, other things will happen which will be all negative. So these are the kind of things of concern that our communities are ultimately being affected, as are communities worldwide. It is the pandemic, the 2 years of that, we climbing back out from that, and we straight into another global crisis. We've gone full round.
Incredible, the seamless transition between a pandemic and potentially a global conflict. I mean, it's as if somebody's scripting all of this. It really is. I mean, the transition. You know, one week, literally the third week in February, as everything was being wound down in relation to the pandemic, the very following week, the very next week, all of a sudden, you have this hysteria in relation to, essentially, I can't understand what it's about. I mean, I really can't understand what it's about.
Of course, this war is not started in the 3rd of February or third week in
No,
February.
it started back in 2014.
2014, yes.
It probably escalated in February, but I still cannot understand that for a country who's unaffected by it, essentially, why the collective hysteria is taking place.
Of course.
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. War is horrible. It's awful. I've experienced it. I've experienced of being a refugee. I experienced of getting out of Lebanon in 1982. You know, you're given an hour to literally pick up whatever belongings you have, put it in a car, bundle all the family, and just try and escape as quickly as possible. I've experienced that.
So I'm going to bring it back now to the issue at your son's school. And you wrote them a letter, and what was the response?
Actually, the headmaster was completely understanding of it. He said, look, I'm glad you brought these issues to my attention, because it's something, even on the children's media, that is never discussed. There seems to be an element of trying to control the narrative, an element of trying to mislead people into the issues involved here. And I'm glad that you brought it to my attention. And he actually had what he was effectively a collective refugee solidarity day. It wasn't restricted to one particular race. So
that is wonderful. I like the word solidarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings me back to my point. The average individual in Britain, right, 99.9% of them are the most decent people you will see anywhere across the globe. I don't think there are more. I don't think there are fairer people on this planet than those who live in Great Britain. They have an aversion to unfairness. They have an aversion to injustice, and they also have a strict adherence to equity and the rule of law and playing by the rules.
That is absolutely wonderful.
The system itself, and that's why I call it systemic racism. The system itself is designed to pit one community against the other. It is there designed to turn people who are ordinary, decent people into having certain stereotypes, which then engenders racial discrimination.
That is a fantastic point, which we have to really elaborate on that in great detail and talk about it and not put it under the carpet, because what you're talking about is we are having inbuilt inside us, the racism is festering because of all this separatism that you are talking about, where communities are kept apart instead of we all week we've been running this programs on EDI, and they're all going to be about we coexist, but do we integrate?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I don't want to plug or advertise, but if you really want to read about what you call systemic racism and around the subject, I've been going through and reading John Barnes's book on racism, and really, I would recommend people to read that because essentially, again, it brings back to the point we always used to make. On an individual level, that racism doesn't exist. The system has nuance, directed people to think in a certain way, to give certain stereotypes, because essentially that is the way the system works. It pits one group of people against the other.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I challenge anyone to say that those who voted for Brexit were actually racist. They're not. Because I worked in those areas. You know, I worked in those communities. I worked up in Teesside. I worked up uh, in County Durham. I worked up in Newcastle and Sunderland. They are the finest people that you will ever meet. The most genuinely friendly people you will ever meet. They don't have a racist bone in their body, right?
They're very passionate.
They
They're
have
very passionate people. They are.
What?
Very passionate.
They're very
No,
passionate
absolutely.
people,
Very
they are.
passionate people, very decent people.
Mm.
And they are just as the rest of the ethnic minorities in Britain, the vast majority of them, have been hard done by the same system that all working class and middle class communities are suffering from in Britain. Their grievances are the same grievances as the average Pakistani or Indian or an Afro-Caribbean person living in Britain, right? And it is the hoarding of wealth by very few people. So when these people decided that we are gonna vote out of Europe, it's not because they were racist. It's because essentially, if you look at a place like the West, the Black Country, how can you explain to him, if you are honestly being fair, to say that the European Union was not thoroughly corrupt when 20,000 jobs were lost in Lumbridge because the European Union, allegedly the European Union, prevented a 300 million government subsidy to keep Rover afloat and save 20,000 jobs, yet at the drop of a hat, you know, literally a push of a button in 2008, when the banks were all going pop, they decided at a push of a button to print 800 million pounds. What is somebody who is in that community supposed to think of the European Union?
Of course,
That's not racism. That is disenfranchisement. That is economic disenfranchisement.
so you talk about economic imbalance in our society, but this is an issue worldwide. It's not only here. We have that disparity. We have it throughout the world. And a lot of these migrants are economic migrants, and some of them are from war-torn countries. They are suffering
Yeah,
from
but
war.
I'm an economic migrant.
Yeah. So I
My
think
presence in the UAE is economic migrants. The 500,000 British expats in the UAE are all economic migrants. Why should the types of me as an economic migrant be allowed into a different country, yet somebody who's coming in to take jobs that no one in the country wants to do because they are so poorly paid, in such bad condition, be then treated with such hostility? Whereas us, we are lavished with praise when we go over to places like in the Gulf and in the rest of the Arab world and in Africa, and they treat us as some sort of I don't know, something that has descended from heaven, and pay us wages that even the locals dream of getting. That's an economic type of migrancy. So why is me as an economic migrant acceptable, and somebody who comes across from Africa just trying to do slightly better for himself in a job that no one in Britain wants to take.
Of course,
at all.
the answer to that is highly qualified, and that is what it's all about. And this is what we've been pushing
Zed,
throughout the
it's
month.
nothing to do with high qualification. I'll tell you why. Because there are people, you know what I mean. There are people around me who are just as qualified as I am, who are paid less than me, only on the basis of their passport. It's nothing to do with qualification. It's to do with discrimination.
Of course, those matters are prevalent throughout the regions that you mentioned right here, but I'm going to bring it back here, right here to our doorstep here. That is where we are saying that we want integration. We have coexistence, 50 years of coexistence I've seen here, the time we've been here from Uganda as Ugandan Asians. And do we have integration? That is the question. And Yusra, who came on
By the way,
earlier on,
we don't have integration for this reason, and I've been thinking about this. I have been pondering as to why working class communities who once upon a time in the 1970s and early 1980s stood by each other on the picket lines trying to get equal rights. They were white working classes, they were Asian working classes, they were Afro-Caribbean working class people, all fighting for the same thing. And now, in this day and age, they are all being pitted against one another, in conflict with one another. And the answer is simple. Essentially, Britain is a bit unique in the terms, in the way the communities are structured. They're essentially ghettoized. So during the 70s and 80s, the communities actually got to know each other at work. These communities, the working class communities, were meeting one another in the cotton mills, in the wool mills, in the steel mills of industrial Britain.
in the foundries, yeah.
In the foundries. But once those mills were closed down, once the industrial heart was ripped out, not only did you rip out the heart of those working class communities, but you also ripped out the social cohesion, because the only places where they could actually meet and understand that they had a lot in common with one another, that was taken. That was taken away. So they no longer met at all. And they all became compartmentalized in their own little ghettos.
Of course, we have to go through our journey of life to adapt to change. Now, we're coming to the end of the program. We've just been talking for 10 minutes and it's gone so fast. Of course,
Yes.
It's almost an hour, right? So this is very interesting conversation. We're only going to learn by discussing with each other, debating with each other, and empowering ourselves with knowledge that we did not have before. So we grow with our interaction, with our cohesion with each other. So, brothers, I would like you to say goodbye to all our listeners who've been listening in right now. You go first, Osama.
Yeah, look, I thank you for inviting me on. And, I wish everybody a happy Ramadan, and may Allah accept everyone's endeavors. I mean, look, if anybody of the listeners get the chance,
Jazakallah khair, Brother Sajid.
get the chance to visit Egypt for this reason.
We are now coming to the end of the show. We look forward to talking to you